Hello and welcome to the Fellowship Phase, an Adventures in Middle-earth podcast. I'm Josh and that's Callum. We're going to give you inside information on how to find your own path through Tolkien's world.
Stonyford is the southernmost settlement of the Beornings beyond the old forest road. Here a stone tower once stood, and a ford to cross the river. Of the tower, only a small pile of stones remains, and the village lies between the woodman settlements of Woodacell, Woodman Town and Roscabel to the east, and Mountain Hall to the west. Here, Heartwolf is the Thane named by Beorn to lead the people of Stonyford as our adventurers arrive.
Hello, Callum.
Hello, Josh.
Welcome back. How are you?
I'm looking forward to this. It
was a stretch. I liked it. I liked the commitment.
It got a stony reception.
It did get. Is this the tone that the episode's going to have? Just puns.
Yeah, that's what I do.
I'm excited to talk about this because we're going to talk about one of my favorite parts of our entire adventure over the last couple of years, which is the village of Stonyford. And we've mentioned it a few times on the pod already, and I'm glad that we get to actually get into it and explain to people what it was, what it is. I hope it's still standing, and how much we love it.
Yes.
I'm also intrigued because I'm just going to keep steamrolling over you here. I'm also intrigued because I'm very excited to talk about this, because so much of this obviously has happened for us as players. I have so many questions for you as the lore master about how you prepped it and the direction that things went, because it's been such an integral part of the game. So I'm going to ask lots of questions.
Okay, great. Well, I'll maybe start things off by telling you a bit about Stonyford. So Stonyford is a village, and as we heard in the little narrative introduction there, it lies in the southern part of the Beorning's land. Now, Tolkien very loosely sketched out what was going on in the Anduin Vale in his writings. He makes mention of the Beornings, and after Beorn fought to the Battle of the Five Armies, that he became more of a leader. And later on, the Beornings are mentioned in the context of Lord of the Rings because they talk about Grimbeorn the Old being the leader of the Beornings. That's about it. We know they're around, we know there's a people. And from that skeleton of an outline, the creators of the game have sketched out a little bit more. So they've popped some small settlements, some characters around the lands. The main focus point is Beorn's Hall. And Stonyford is one of the, I guess it's still a small settlement, but in our game at least, it's been one of the major Beorning places. And you can imagine that this is a settlement that's been there for some time, and they've become Beornings. They're following Beorn, their tribe. So maybe, as with that sort of societal setup, their allegiances may switch to different people or different groups. But there's something unique about Beornings in this game. They've got a culture, and they've got a culture of virtues, and they are unique in that they're maybe a bit larger and stronger, and they have that link to animals. So in the book, Stonyford is mentioned in the Wilderland Adventures. There's a brief paragraph in the Rovanian Region Guide, and then it goes on to be the center point of one of the adventures in Wilderland Adventures. There's a sort of murder mystery that's set there, and that introduces all the characters and has some good starting points for a lore master to go and have a look at Stonyford and flesh out. Now, that's not what we did with it, but it was quite useful to have that as a starting point, to have, these are the names of the people who live there, here's their relationships with each other, and here's some of the things that might develop from that. And where it is geographically, it's sort of down the Anduin River from Beorn's Hall and the Carrick, which are named places just north of the Gladden Fields, which is on the west coast.
And south of the old forest road,
In the book, it mentions that the fort there is no longer functioning, but we had it that the fort is there. It's just not always accessible, which I think it makes it much more important and interesting as a place. And the game designers have written, again, there's not much written about the woodmen, other than Tolkien mentioning it. There are the woodmen, and they're around. So we've got several free settlements to the east and one to the west that are the woodman places, and this is geographically situated right between them, which is, I think, really interesting as a cultural exchange point between Beornings and woodmen, and a trade route potentially as well.
I think mention that thing about the ford no longer being functional in the written module, even though we have it that it is. I think that was a good decision on your part, because it does make the village a really important location, because you can cross the river, which is not possible in many places. So for us as players, it was quite a transit point. We visited a lot of places. It kind of put it right in the middle of the region for us, and it meant that it was important strategically. And I think it let us tell a lot of stories around it. So although it was a small place, it wasn't just some backwater that, nothing happened. Like, lots of people passed through. We passed through a lot. There were a lot of kind of competing interests.
It was a forward water.
Yes, it was very much a forward water. Ford word. Is this how we're going to go? You're just going to see how you can get to the genesis of the word Ford.
I just keep thinking of fjord in the Critical Role.
Is he there? Is he like an unlockable character in?
He's under the water.
Stonyford? We could get to Stony Fjord.
The watcher in the water is Zukutoa.
We should talk about this another time. I feel there's a crossover to be had. So how did we first come across Stonyford? I suppose it's a good narrative start. You knew that it existed as a settlement, and as a player, as a character, my character Theodric, an older Beorning, would obviously have been aware of it, because it's one of the few Beorning settlements.
Yeah, I think it was just you'd been at Mountain Hall, which is the west. You'd come through the Elf Path, which we talked about already, one of the starter adventures. And then the second adventure you did was you went into the Gladden Fields and had a look around there for someone, which we'll talk about in a future episode. And then you were at Mountain Hall to talk to people there about what had been going on, because I think there'd been someone from Mountain Hall, remembering now, someone from Mountain Hall had been in Gladden Fields.
Yes.
You wanted to speak to them. That was it. Oh no, you'd come from the Gladden Fields into Mountain Hall, is it? That's it. So it was on your way back.
Yeah.
You'd gone that route. Yeah.
We were crossing from the west to the east of the Anduin.
And you wanted to go from Mountain Hall to Roscobel, and the most direct route for that on the map was via this place, Stonyford.
Mm-hmm. We could have spent several days going further up to the old ford and then several days going back. But Theodric knew of this other smaller crossing, which was why we decided to go that way. And that was our kind of player introduction to the village.
What's your memory of introducing it? Because I guess I could say what I planned, but
I have quite strong memories of it, which I look back on in a quite mixed way, because it became such a really quite emotive place for us as a party. We spent a lot of sessions there. We're very invested in it, which we're going to keep talking about. I, as Theodric, didn't have the best start with Stonyford. I think I had suggested we take that route because I knew the area best from my backstory. And I said, there's this place we can cross the river. Now we arrived, and one of the few ways the Beornings as a people make money is they charge tolls to cross the river. Now that happens at the old ford. There are mechanics for how that works. You can actually take a fellowship phase to spend time being basically the toll keeper, and you can collect a small amount of money and information. The Beornings at Stonyford were doing the same thing. Now, although it was very convenient for us, it's actually slightly more out of the way. The high pass, which goes over the Misty Mountains and then leads to the Dwarf Road through Mirkwood, is further north, which is why the old ford has maintained this reputation as being the crossing point. Fewer people come to Stonyford. We expected we might have to pay some kind of toll, and we also expected them to be friendly people, because they're Beornings, and I was a Beorning. Karhu, the other character with us, was a Beorning. We arrived, and there was this sort of strange sense about it. They wanted to charge us to cross, and I got the impression they were overcharging us. I think we'd done a series of rolls. I felt as a player it was maybe a bit much, and I asked you, does Theodric get a sense that they're maybe being ripped off here? He was quite suspicious, and he's an older man, quite worldly. He's seen things. He wasn't going to put up with any crap. Like, if he felt they were getting ripped off, particularly by their own people. And I think I rolled an insight check, and it was like, there's something's off here. Something's not quite right, which I hot-headed Theodric jumped to conclusions that they were trying to rip us off.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't happy.
It's one of those things where it's like, as an insight role, I'm a big fan of not ever just directly saying, you're definitely sure of this. And instead saying like, well, you can see that they're uncomfortable, you know, they're clearly hiding something, you know, that, you know, you get a sense and you can draw your own conclusions from that. But that is the information you pick up. Like, what is actually physically possible to pick up from an interaction? Like, what are you getting? Because just like in real life, you can get a vibe of some situation, but you can never be entirely certain of what's going on in someone else's mind.
Yeah. Insight check's not a lie detector. I can't just find out the facts based on a single roll. Theodric being quite a sort of haughty character, traveled a lot. He was just putting up with no nonsense. He was also acting as a kind of the leader at this point, getting us across. So I think felt a certain responsibility for not letting also his companions getting ripped off. And he decided to be very angry. He was very charismatic character, charisma based. He made quite a strong intimidation check to basically bulldoze our way through intimidation check. And it didn't go particularly well. And there was quite a lot of bad blood, which at the time didn't seem that important. Like it felt like, oh, that could have gone nicer, but it didn't matter that much. We ended up not staying in Stonyford because there was this tension, and we camped, I think, a little further down the road. And some of the other characters felt quite bad about what happened. And I must say, as a player, I don't think Theodric felt bad because, you know, he just felt that was the way to go. I felt a bit bad about being rude. They kind of snuck back and discovered that there was something else going on in Stonyford, but that we weren't getting ripped off.
Yes, I love that whole interaction because I knew exactly what's going on, and I was actually quite surprised when you took that angle on it, because I think it was quite a lot of money at that point. It was like something like 3 silver pieces, and your immediate thing was like, "That's a lot of money," and I was like, I hadn't even thought that was a lot of money. I'd just been like, this is the amount of money. I think I based it off what the old Ford was, and it was roughly the same, which is, I guess, quite expensive. And I think I even said that it did feel quite expensive. And what's going on in the background there? So I'm not sure this is in the module or not, but essentially there's a Thane of Stonyford, which is a guy called Heartwolf, and we were running it that he was ill in bed. And so his daughter was sort of taking charge, and there was a little bit of discomfort in the village because they felt weak, and your party was quite, you know, large and well armed and threatening, and they felt, you know, they didn't have the authority there. They didn't have the authority figure. They were all coming into this role newly, so they were uncomfortable with it. And particularly some of one of the, you know, I guess Garhu mainly is a very intimidating presence with, like, I think at this point maybe had a giant wolf's head over his head and
wearing
a big
warlock pelt.
Yeah, so, you know, pretty terrifying to look at. So, you know, the discomfort and that what you were picking up with your insight check was like, you know, we're stressed, someone's ill, we don't have our leader, we don't feel not comfortable in the situation, we feel threatened. And that led to a really interesting social encounter.
I think it was really interesting, and in hindsight, like, Theodric is a healer. That was his expertise. But both sides were being quite standoffish, and if they hadn't been, there was quite an easy solution, which was he was a very experienced healer and would happily have helped Heartwolf there and then. But I think from a roleplay point of view, it made perfect sense that they were suspicious of us and we were a bit suspicious of them, and things went downhill. In the end, we did return to the village, kind of not begrudgingly, but there was tension. It wasn't a happy return, and we did provide some medical aid to Heartwolf for Thane, but which then, as a player, I felt even more guilty because I was quite conflicted about how I'd approached it. I felt I'd done the right thing in character, even though as a player, I wish that I had just been nice and helped them. But that kind of set our boundaries with Stonyford, which is we'd had this kind of unfortunate arrival the first time we saw it. We had quite a tense dynamic with the people who lived there. And although we did help Heartwolf, we left with a bit of bad blood between particularly Theodric and the people, but the party and the village as a whole. And then we continued off to finish our adventure, and we didn't return to Stonyford for a little while after that. The next step really was when, well, as Beorn kind of gave us the news of Heartwolf's death.
Yeah, that was, I think, a fellowship phase later. So a couple of months, maybe you'd been around in the area and you were at Bjorn's Hall. You met some new characters. It's when you met Malbeth and Isambard, and you were about to go off to the city of Ithid, and he mentioned that Heartwolf had died, and then that he was going to appoint a new Thane of Stonyford. Now, this idea just sort of came to me. I'm not sure if it was in the moment, but it wasn't something I was planning when you came to Stonyford.
Oh, really?
But after you'd been to Stonyford and what happened, I love when things don't go quite right and there's a tension, or that that makes it much more interesting to me. Like, oh, we like everybody and everybody likes us, and it's just brilliant, great time. I find it much more interesting when there's a little bit of tension, politics or something. And so I was like, well, Frederick's a senior Beorning, and Bjorn knows him and trusts him, and he's a leader. There's a Thane offering opening. He's just done this mission for Bjorn and helped him out. Right, Thedric's going to be the Thane of Stonyford. I remember when I said that. I think, what was your reaction? Do you remember how you felt about that?
I felt very conflicted as a player and as a character, which I thought was great for the game, because I was really excited as a player, because I was like, great, this is like a title's being bestowed on my character, which it felt he'd really earned. He was deserving of it, and it meant a degree of status. And Bjorn, who's one of my favorite characters in the books, so I really enjoyed interacting with him. He is the one who's died. So I really, as a player, enjoyed it, but I felt like it was kind of bittersweet, because the person I was inheriting it from, I had not helped as much as I could have, and had an awkward interaction with. And I think Thedric felt the same. He felt a bit more, probably not as excited. He felt quite solemn and felt this was, a duty that he would do for Bjorn, and he would want to do well, and he'd be proud of it. And I think even in the moment he said that he would become his priority. He would stop traveling. He would go to Stonyford and do what he needed to. And he knew that there would be a lot of social interaction needed to even get his relationship up to just like a basic level. Like, he was not liked there. And he needed to do a lot of work to win these people around. Like, the Beornings are proud people. They respect strength, and they live out in the wilderness, and they need protection. They don't necessarily have time for kind of social niceties. And I think Thedric knew that he would need to very quickly win them round somehow.
We talked when you were making Thedric that you liked the idea of playing an older character who could come in, because you were the only person who was playing the game who'd ever done any role-playing games before. Mm-hmm. And so we talked about, like, how do we kind of build that into the game, that you are the more experienced player, so you're likely to be helping me, because I'd never run a game before, with rules and helping other players get used to it, and maybe taking the lead a lot in the role playing and sort of setting the tone. And so that's, I guess, we talked about that in Thedric, like, you have this older character that can lead things. And I think from the beginning we both knew that he was going to retire. Yeah. And so when this came up as an opportunity, I was like, oh, this character's ill. Oh, he's going to die. Oh, they need to fit. Oh, this is perfect. Building the story together. And I think there are rules in the Lore Master's Guide about bestowing titles. Yeah. And you can get different, each culture has a different title you can get, and it has certain benefits. Sometimes you get other rewards with it, but I feel like sometimes it's a bit lacking in like, oh, you've got a title,
what does it actually mean? Like, does it have any consequences?
Yeah, you get mechanical benefits, and there's also rules for holdings, which we'll come on to in a moment, but we'll talk about what we did first. So you went off to City of the Head, which we've talked about, and you came back, and I think the next thing you did is you went to Stonyford.
Yes, it was very much wanted to then establish himself as the Thane, make amends, but knew that was complicated. He needed to show strength while making amends if he was to win the respect of these people. Like, he'd met them, they were complex characters. You'd done a good job of establishing what seemed to be some kind of inner politics of a small village, but there were obviously already tensions there. Returned and with the party, which created even more tension, because it felt like there was almost these two sides to this argument, that there were the people who lived in Stonyford and had, for some of them, their entire lives, And then there was Theodric, who, although he was well respected by Beorn, he was still an outsider to the village. And then he had come with, a group of people, many of whom were not Beornings at all. There was this tension between the two parties about what would happen. And as Theodric, I really wanted to I wanted to win them round and prove myself to be worthy of it. And I had then in my mind that was going to be steadily retiring Theodric as a character, and this seemed a perfect opportunity. He would establish himself as a Thane, hopefully, and he would choose not to continue adventuring because he'd stay there and prioritize it, which felt like a good way of saying goodbye to a character with a very satisfying end. And I remember after a bit of initial politicking, there was a character there called Rafik, who had designs, I think, on being the next Thane. Certainly did not respect Theodric being an outsider. Rafik had been there for a while and felt that perhaps he was the strongest person in the village, and he'd made sacrifices and it was his by right. And he challenged Theodric in the hall there. And there was quite a big sort of role-play encounter with all the party, kind of led by Theodric. There was a lot of rolling. Other people were chipping in with insight. I think Karhu made an intimidation check. There was a lot of tension, and I loved it because it really felt like, if this doesn't go well, I may end up being, kind of exiled from the village that I'm supposed to be a Thane of, and I would have felt like the ultimate goal had really failed. It seemed that we'd won round some of the people there, but there were complex politics. And Rafik actually challenged Theodric to single combat, which presented out, I loved, it was such a great moment. And I was so conflicted as a player because part of me thought this will be great fun. Because I think Rafik had said that they would maybe fight on the stepping stones in the river. It felt like it was going to be this really cinematic 1v1 combat. As a player, I thought that, and I thought this would be great. Whether he wins or loses, this will be great, a great moment. I thought, I just don't think Theodric as a character would do this. He's not a warrior. His whole character is that he's traveled the world and he's met people and he's used his words and his personality and been diplomatic. I just couldn't see that at this crucial moment he would throw that out the window, an old man, and pick up a stick to fight this bigger, younger Beorning in the river. So instead, he made a speech and said that ultimately we needed to look to strength, and Beorn was the strength in the lands, and that it would be for Beorn to decide. And Rafik and Theodric then travelled north together.
Under some duress.
Under some duress to Beorn to have this kind of have it out almost with Beorn. And I still sometimes think back and think having the combat would have been fun. I think it would have been an exciting moment. It didn't make sense for me as I think as a character that he would have done it. Particularly because I knew that was why Rafik was doing it. He was challenging him to something that he was strong at, that he felt Theodric was weak at.
I loved your response to that because it was not what I expected. I didn't know, no idea what was going to happen. And that whole storyline came out. So in the pre-written stuff, there's a character called Rafik. He's murdered. That's not a spoiler. He's murdered. So he's like the plot. He's the victim in the murder mystery. So it's like he never turns up.
Oh, interesting.
So I completely changed who the characters were and what their motivations were. So I don't think it's spoilers.
Because he's been a huge character in our game.
Yes. Well, that's why I set up. And I kind of thought when you were there, I was like, so what's happened so far? So there's tension. People are going to be distrustful. Someone else probably was going for it. Well, it's this guy. And then as you were there, the first couple of weeks you were there, people were talking about getting enough food to feed everybody, how, all these new people that are going to winter here, how are we going to manage that? A lot about the different roles in the village. And you all came in, I think, with a lot of lofty ideas.
Yes.
About particularly Torvald's character had loads of really interesting ideas about how to improve the village. And everyone else there was like, hold on a second, we need to eat. You have to help get basics. Food.
Yeah.
And that was part of the tension in the village was, these people coming in, they're trying to change our village, not sticking up our traditions. They're not the strongest person. Who's put this guy in charge? And that encounter where it was like essentially like a debate for
Yeah,
the village's hearts and minds, like, and it's sort of like a skills challenge that you ran. And I actually felt like that was one of the times I ran a character, and I felt like I got really into their head,
yeah,
and I felt like that encounter went so well because it was quite easy to think like, well, it's all about strength and like, like these ideals, which I obviously don't agree with, but I thought it was like potentially something that would be felt in this context.
yeah.
And I actually had a lot of stuff to throw at you guys, which I thought it was fun that you were doing as a player, but it was quite right. I mean, like, why are you concentrating on this like vanity project
Yeah.
when we're struggling to like survive here? And you had lots of arguments coming back at that, so I really loved that. And I think what that did was it built, no matter what happened there, because I kind of thought if you went to the combat, it would be difficult. I wasn't going to make it impossible, but it would be difficult. You'd be at disadvantages, and if you had lost, it probably would have been to the death, or you might have fallen in the river. Like, who knows what would have happened?
Yeah.
And then that would have been Thedric gone, which I don't think would have been the greatest way for you to lose your character, but I
No.
think it would be a really great way to build a villain that you cared about.
Yes.
This guy, I was like, here's a villain. Like, I've got into his head, and he's still a villain now. What, like 80 sessions later or something?
Yeah.
Crazy.
And
He's around.
He's been a really meaningful character. I think what he did really well was settlements can be really complicated. Like we've both run multiple different games.
Yeah.
Settlements can be really challenging because there are loads of NPCs altogether, and just flitting between NPCs can be hard. Often
Hello,
you have
Callum. Hello, Callum.
exactly. Often as a DM, if you're in a settlement, you end up playing multiple NPCs in the same scene, which is really awkward. You've also got all these different motivations all at once, and you have to kind of roughly keep track of like who would be doing what and what's all happening at the same time, which is it's good fun, and if it's done well, but it's a challenge. I think what you did really well was creating the central tension in the village and keeping it quite simple. There was a group of people here who were on tough times. We were the party coming in, were new. There was a tension between those two groups. And everything that we did, you kind of kept us focused that there was that tension. Like you say, we're wanting to, will we upgrade the village? Will we build a bridge? Will we resurrect the watchtower? And there was the constant, well, we need to feed each other. You've brought extra mouths in, winter's coming. And then that came to a head in the hall with that debate. Thedric and Rathic almost being that central tension kind of embodied, and the other players getting involved, I think was a really good way to run a settlement, which felt like a very real place, even though really it wasn't that complicated. There was really just two competing ideas, which you used multiple characters to show. And I think the way it resolved was good, because if we'd fought, if Thedric had died, yes, it would have set up a villain for the long term. If Rathic had died, though, it would have kind of quite neatly tied that up. And I don't think that would have been the most satisfying. Whereas instead, we went to see Beorn, and he was very clear that he did not respect his decision being challenged by Rathic, and that he'd chosen Thedric for good reason, and that Thedric was, his representative, and he was going to lead. Rathic effectively became exiled, so he was still a character out there in the world. He was a loose end. And then at Stonyford, we discovered more and more about who he was. He had a wife in the village, Brunhild, and we discovered that he had been quite a terrible husband. He'd been abusive, and there'd been this tension in the village which had been hidden. And so we kind of opened up with her as a character, and she became an important part of the village. And we realized there was more to him than we'd first known. And he was out in the wilderness somewhere, and he had a grudge against Thedric, and he had a grudge against the party. And I loved that. I loved that because it felt like we had a victory as a group. We won the debate, and we won Bjorn's trust. But the consequence was that there was this loose end, and I loved it.
Matt Caldwell talks about that in one of his videos. He talks about failure has consequences, but success has consequences as well. And I think that was the example there. Like, you won out, and I think that's, I guess, the politics. The other characters that are there, I kind of tried to tie in everything, and I think what you guys do really well, and maybe this comes back to just how we have run the game quite differently to what it's designed. A game is designed to be, you do an adventure phase and then you have a fellowship phase. And the adventure phases are very tight, as in like, here's a story, you're going to do the story, and then you're going to finish it, and you're going to have to do your fellowship phases. There's not really any role play in between.
Yes.
Whereas we do it a bit more like a standard, like open world D&D game, I think, sandbox. So the role playing from an adventure phase quite often, like I don't think everyone's so invested in the characters in the world that you wouldn't be satisfied if I just said you're gonna have a fellowship phase in Stonyford, or even if you do say I'm going to take this fellowship phase, and then we sort of role play what that would mean,
Yeah.
like little segments of it. So in this one, it was like, food, like, oh, Runan went off hunting and got some food, and Torvald did some research and spoke to people and tried to get it. Because there's other people around as well. So Heartwolf was the Thane who dies. Ava's daughter, who's like been lumped without responsibility, and I think it's a bit relieved that Theodric's taken it off her.
Yeah.
Rafik, we've talked about. Brunhild becomes more of a part of the village after that. There's Wilfreda, who's this like powerful warrior woman who is like having slight romance intrigue with Karhu, which doesn't come
Which
to
I
anything.
loved because they were both not great at articulating their feelings. And as a player watching, it was so funny them trying to like navigate the start of a romantic relationship.
Yeah, I actually enjoyed having those interactions with Scott. It was quite funny. We obviously didn't go too far into it. And then there's also Helmgut, who is the alcoholic of the village, who over many social interactions with Theodric, eventually you essentially helped through the things that were troubling him. And
Yeah.
I think what it is, he's mentioned in the book, but basically he'd lost. I don't think this is in the book, but he'd lost a son, or he'd had some grief earlier on in his life that he'd never really worked through, and then he'd end up becoming alcoholic. And every character in the village has been affected hugely by Theodric and the party.
Yeah.
And that's the people. But then there's also a lot of stuff about the place and the structures and the holding rules. So maybe we could talk about briefly what the holding rules are in the game and then what we did.
Yes, absolutely. Because this was a part of the game which it's kind of like, in video game terms, a sort of mini game that everyone really loves. That it's a kind of this additional set of rules, which I think you did, and then we picked up the mantle of blended it into the role play quite well, so that it didn't feel that much like a mini game. It felt like a kind of core part of what we were doing. But you created a map of the village.
Yeah, on Incarnate, which is a map thing you can make like zoomed in settlements. So I put like a couple of houses. It had a little tagline of like Stonyford, Thane, Beorn, Theodric, year 29, whatever it was, 46 or something at this point.
And what we really liked was that there was kind of blank space on that map. And there was this kind of implication that we could, if we spent more time there, develop the village in some way, that there was change was possible. The characters were changing. The personnel there, Rafik left, Brunhild kind of came out of her shell once her controlling husband had left. Helmgut and Theodric bonded. We had these other characters. Some people were passing through as well. And the actual physicality of the village was changing. And some of those ideas we had, we got to kind of put into action to sort of almost make a home of our own.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, what did you do? You built because the hall where you received them had initially just been someone's house.
Yeah.
So you built a hall in the style of Bjorn's hall, not as grand, but a hall with an upstairs, and it was defensible, which we'll come on to later, and had a fire pit in the middle. And then I think later on you ended up building a watchtower on the other side of the river. That was much later on, and you built
that we added. We added so Isambard, the Hobbit, who'd only recently joined us at this point, was really interested in brewing. As a hobbit from the Shire, was interested in beer and set up like a little brewery, almost like as a lean-to outside. And that led to one of the other characters who joined us later was effectively a chef, a cook. And they combined to make basically an inn. Like it became more of a crossroads, and we thought it would make sense if there was somewhere that people who were traveling would be able to stop and stay, and they'd have Stonyford's special brew, and there'd be food. As Theodric, because he was very much driven by being a healer, and that was partly why he traveled, was he offered his aid out in the world. That's kind of what his purpose had been for a very long time. He felt he was staying, but he could still have a meaningful effect if it became a place, almost like a sanctuary that people could come to heal.
Hmm.
And I took it that he wasn't like a bookie person, but he was quite worldly. He probably would have had some ideas about Rivendell, or maybe he'd heard of this idea of like the last homely house where people maybe spent time to rest and recuperate. And I think he had an idea that Stonyford could be like that people from the Vale could travel to Stonyford and could rest and take the waters, and he would be able to apply herbs. So
Resort
what he
spa.
wanted, exactly, it was basically just a resort spa, and the the inn would have a jacuzzi, we'd have après ski, but that's what he really wanted. And so his goal was to build basically a house of healing, was his idea, and everyone else is kind of pitching in with stuff.
It's amazing how invested everybody got into Stonyford. I don't know like what you think, Josh, about how that came about. I think I wonder if it was that you were building the story and you were so into the role play and interactions, and maybe it was that you were just looking for something like this to build on. And there is something so fun about, like is it like the Fallout games and stuff, where like Skyrim has a little bit of it where you can like build up bases and have a place, and maybe just recognizing that you guys wanted that and so gave you the mechanics to do it.
I think that's exactly right. And I think we'd been playing long enough that the party had quite a sort of established dynamic. And we did kind of want to put down roots almost, that we felt these relationships had been cemented and we'd been on adventures, and we wanted to kind of share the characters' space together. And in a lot of video games, you can set up a base, or you can get a house or something. And often it's kind of an afterthought, like you finish a mission and you get a house, but there's no mechanical benefit from that. It's just a building you can go into, and you can't really shape it very much. Whereas with Adventures Middle Earth and a role-playing game, it's like a blank canvas. Like really, the village was open to us changing it as much as we wanted to, and that as you felt was feasible as the lore master. And that was exciting, that actually, if we spent time here, there's no reason we couldn't build a hall. Like if we collect enough wood and we roll some athletics checks, and someone has proficiency with carpentry tools, then we can do that.
Yeah, you're heroes. You're very capable people with lots of proficiencies.
And it was very satisfying that you had that map that it was basically quite modular, and you could add buildings onto it, which was lovely, because then you'd post the map up again and it would be,
you guys had such smiles when that map came up. And I quite a lot of time. Again, it was much else going on because it was lockdown. Building that map and putting the buildings in like flowers, added some beehives. It was really fun, and I kind of in the back of my head had this will be really useful if I ever need a battle map for here. So that's sort of why I put so much time into it. Just coming back to the rules in the game, so essentially the way it works, and we started off with this, and I think we've sort of moved away from it because it was just more fun to role play it out and see what was possible with skill checks. Essentially, you can be given a holding. It usually comes with a title, like being the Thane. And the holdings have ratings from 0 to 6, which is basically a modifier and a dice roll, which I'll come on to. And as the number goes up, the description goes up, and it becomes better and better. And you can take a fellowship phase to tend to your holding. And the tending the holding, essentially you can spend gold pieces equal to thrice the holding's improved rating. So if you're going from 0 to +1, it costs 3 gold because it's 3 times 1, for example. And then what the rating is that when you have like upkeeps at the end of each fellowship phase, or every year, you have to do an upkeep check. And the DC is their standard or living. Yeah, you roll a d20, add the hero's proficiency bonus and the holdings ratings. And then essentially the results of that can make it go up. So you either get some gold, or it improves, or maybe it gets worse. So it's sort of abstracting out, like you have responsibility as holding. It punishes you if you don't go there for a long period of time, and rewards you if you spend fellowship phases there improving it.
Yes. I think the rules are fine. I think they work. They make sense as a kind of mini game and a sort of bolt on. And I think they would work fine if you didn't particularly care about that part of the game. So, you've got a title which comes with the holding, and actually maybe you want to go off fighting in a dungeon, and you're not that fussed about upkeeping this village. So you have to spend some gold and send some gold back, but that's something that can be done within like 5 minutes, a quick gold dice roll.
It's a bit tricky to get your head around. I've maybe not explained it there. It's in the Mirkwood campaign book, pages 9 and 10. Yeah.
It feels to me like a way of incentivizing the players to take holdings seriously as a thing. But because, I don't know how you feel, I felt we took it so seriously without needing the rules. We went there and we wanted to build on it. That almost we didn't need the rules. I was like,
guys, come play the campaign now.
We were like, this is the game.
The Stonyford role-playing game.
I think because we picked up on and kind of went with it, and that was going to be my question to wrap up the section, was how much of Stonyford, which dominated a big section of our campaign, which actually in our most recent session, which was number 80 or 85 or something ridiculous like that, we've revisited many months later, which was exciting. How much of Stonyford, or how much did you intend Stonyford to be central to the party, or how much of it was that we picked it up as players and ran with it and you went with that?
The latter. It was very much like, here's this place. Oh, here's a title. You can go there. Oh, I've made a map. Oh, they love this. Let's do more of this. It was just, and the whole game has been like that. You just need to see what your players enjoy. Your players might not like having little holding and spending lots of time there. And so don't do it. You have to see what your table like. And I guess part of what your table likes will come down to what you like, because if you really enjoy something, I quite like making the map. So maybe that influenced you liking it because I was enjoying doing it.
Yeah, I think there is a degree of feedback loop in any role-playing games that as the game master, lore master, DM, whatever, is doing the bits they enjoy the most. Often that as the player, that's the bit that's most enjoyable because you can see they're enjoying it, they're passionate, and then you kind of feed off each other, which is, I think, why different tables and groups could end up having very different experiences, even of the same material.
Yes, so true.
So much of what we've done is from material either from Tolkien or from the Adventures of Middle-earth books. I think if we spoke to some of the people who listen to the podcast about how they engage with that material, their tales would be completely different.
Yeah, if you went to Stonyford and you had an interaction there, I'd be really interested to hear what it is. I think most people would be like, we did the Wilderland Adventures campaign and we went to Stonyford and we interacted there because we were investigating this murder. And maybe it would have become more a big deal. I think it was quite unusual. I was just thinking there when you were saying about what I enjoy, and I was thinking how I really enjoy running Radagast as an NPC, and how you all really enjoy that, or some of the more like wacky characters that are in this game or in D&D when we've played that. And I think it just comes across that I really enjoy role-playing.
You're great at them. And Radagast is brilliant. He feels so strange and esoteric and magical. It really works for that. That's really interesting to know that Stonyford was something that we kind of, I was going to say forced you into, that sounds terrible, that we kind of drove because we were so excited by it, that actually drove it being such an important thing.
Yeah.
And interestingly, and we'll come on to this, our actions then drove the plot around Stonyford a lot, for good and ill.
Yes, for good and ill. Well, I think that's all we have to say about Stonyford for now. ... To be continued. No emails except on party business. And comment suggestions and questions to thefellowshipphase@gmail.com. The long year turns to its close. Much we have accomplished these last seasons. Our fellowship disbands, but is not broken, and we will return
on the next episode of The Fellowship Phase.